Hey everyone, this is Roman Prokopchuk, and this is the Digital Savage Experience podcast. Today I have with me Andrew Bolis. He's a fractional CMO and business growth consultant. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on the show, Roman.
My pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Sure. So it's a bit of a long journey with lots of ups and downs. So I was actually born in Egypt, so I immigrated to the U.S. When I was 12, and I think that experience shaped a lot of my career because in a lot of ways it was a bit of a culture shock, sort of big transition. And I immigrated into like a small town where the school didn't even have ESL classes or anything. So everybody looked at me as an alien when I was walking around the school.
Yeah, I'm a first generation immigrant. I came over when I was 5. I went to ESL, so I know that kind of dynamic. What was it, I guess, that interests you in marketing, and how was that kind of journey from when you were in school, obviously learning English, kind of things you may have run into culturally? Because I think I was assimilated pretty easily, but there are obviously challenges. Like you have American friends, regardless of what culture. If you're coming from outside, like they'll look at you, certain traditions, stuff like that. What were your kind of experiences with that?
Yeah, I think having been exposed to two different cultures and seeing that a lot of behavior is just based on norms, based on assumptions, to be honest, based on a lot of things that don't really make sense until you question them and start looking into them. That got me really interested in marketing because I realized, hey, human behavior, you can influence it both in positive and negative ways, and that's something that was appealing to me. Is like, how do people make choices, and how can you influence those choices?
Yeah, I think that's well, I had a career pivot. I was initially supposed to be in federal law enforcement and ended up in marketing as well. But it's one of those things also that I think about, like the immigrant journey. You think like being an immigrant and obviously coming from a situation. I came from Ukraine. It was still under the Soviet Union, so it was like, a gritty upbringing. I was born in '84. Obviously, as a kid, it wasn't as, I guess, severe as an adult, but coming from a tough, potentially tough environment, you think it made you and kind of drove you and helped you through some of the obstacles that you've, I guess, overcome and got to where you are now?
Yeah, I think it helped me build a lot of resilience. So I remember, when I first immigrated, I got into a lot of fights at school, and a lot of it is because I just didn't know English that well. There was a language barrier, and I was one of the only non-white kids at the school, so I was just like strange. And this was before there was internet, like before internet was a popular thing. So like now, you have social media, so you can just pull up photos from anywhere in the world. So a lot of that, yeah, helped me build resilience. I eventually made some friends that helped me a lot, and in some ways too, it taught me like how to create relationships and kind of how to be smart in maneuvering difficult circumstances.
Now, have you always also wanted to, I guess, do marketing, or did you have something else in mind kind of growing up as well?
Yeah, so I in school I did great in math. I was very logical. So initially, I went into tech. So I studied computer science, graduated, worked in tech for a couple of years, and I liked tech. It was very easy for me. But I realized after a while that tech is communicating to machines, like you're programming, you're coding. It's great, but like it felt limited after a while. And then as I was developing my social skills, I realized, hey, like I like actually communicating with people more, and that was how I ended up transitioning into, like, back then it was online marketing because you can only really do it on the web.
Yeah, I agree. I got into digital marketing when it was kind of still like the Wild West, so like 2008, 2009, where there was a lot of more sketchy things that were, I guess, passable. But I think even starting out, I try to be like do the best for the client and the brand, be an extension of the brand, and be kind of a good brand steward. So, kind of your journey to a fractional CMO. You said you transitioned from tech to marketing. What was that like? Kind of like the building blocks, the pillars you overcome. Did you have people that, believed in you, helped you along the way? What was kind of that journey like?
Sure. So this was in the early 2000s. I started coming across like other online marketing gurus who, were talking about marketing, specifically copywriting, and I thought it was pretty cool. And but to make the transition, I couldn't really get a job in marketing, so I had to kind of do it on my own. So I started doing SEO to build traffic, built an email list, started selling products to them, and eventually got into like a lot of affiliate marketing. And I think in the early 2000s, it was actually pretty easy. It wasn't as competitive. You can do it where it's ROI positive. So did that for a few years, and it was a lot of fun because I got to travel while doing it. I got to kind of party, go out as much as I wanted to. It was my early 20s, so in a lot of ways, it was a lot of fun.
And then how did you kind of make the transition from that to a fractional CMO?
Sure. So right around the time when I was turning 30 years old, I realized, hey, like I'm doing marketing on my own. I bring in enough income, to support my lifestyle, but it's not really turning into an actual career. I wasn't that interested into building a big business where I had employees and all that stuff. It just wasn't my thing back then. And I would talk to people who worked in marketing, and I would realize some of them were very senior. I realized like I knew a lot more than them because I had to do it on my own. So I knew kind of the latest stuff, and I was a lot more creative and resourceful about it. So I started interviewing for jobs and ended up getting a job at a marketing agency here in Chicago. It was very small, about 5, 6 people when I started. So almost had to start kind of from the bottom because I was like I don't know, like a marketing manager, but it's really like a job someone with 2, 3 years of experience would get.
And then did you stay with that agency or did you move on somewhere? Because usually, I mean, coming from a marketing background, the faster kind of you get promoted, usually you jump around from agency to agency or you go in-house and to agency, which is unfortunate because if you like a company and you're vested into it, you want to do good and do well for that company and obviously be recognized for it. But ultimately, like myself, from a role that I was in. It was like a SEO social media specialist strategist, like a senior strategist. For the next 3 or 4 years, I had a role every like year at a different agency or company, and it was like skipping to director, and then it was all director level, and unfortunately, like it maximized like the increase in salary, but it was also like unstable because it's a weird dynamic. I'm sure because it's like you're like walking on eggshells in the agency, knowing like the life cycle of a potential person staying at that agency is like 6 months to maybe 18 months. So it's like this weird dynamic. I don't know if you've seen in your career also.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I had a lot of transitions, and even when I joined the agency, I remember my first week, I found out that I'm replacing someone who already left. This person was responsible for all the monthly client reports, and I had like reports for 5 clients to complete in a week. And I had no idea even what type of work was done for those clients, their industries. So I was going through like the old slide decks that this person left behind, just logging into everything and trying to figure it out. So yeah, it was a lot of sort of learning on the spot, just quickly figuring things out. But I think doing that too, just taught me a lot of things pretty quickly. I think what I learned at the agency too was how to communicate with clients because you'll get a lot of requests that don't make sense. Sometimes you have to push back. Sometimes you have to compromise. And I think that balance of it too, like I learned a lot there. But eventually I burned out at the agency because I was doing, the 8 hour workday, 2, 3 hours at night. Half of my workday was client calls. The other half was actually getting the work done for the clients. So eventually, I started looking for another job, and I found one at a B2B SaaS company, and that was kind of my first introduction into B2B marketing.
Yeah, that's kind of I guess, the unfortunate reality of, being at an agency. It's funny because I've spoken at, university to outgoing seniors that are digital marketing, specifically kind of majors, and they're kind of like deer in headlights, thinking they're gonna like work on Madison Avenue, like be like, Mad Men or, that show. And it's like completely different. Like you said, the burnout rates also, like the attrition rate, then like there's also a lot of instability because I've been at agencies where like 40% of their incoming revenue is dependent on like two clients. So if you lose those two clients, you can have like the best employees ever. Like at the end of the day, they're going to cut you because they have to kind of make the bottom line. I hate the saying where like companies say, we're a big family, but we're a family until we lose a client, then it's time to leave. So it's one of those things. And even remembering, having meetings. So some agencies like Mondays were all meetings, like internal meetings. So if I'm running a team and also responsible for strategies, but 6 hours out of the 8 hour day I'm in meetings, how am I ever going to do productive work? So it's just like balancing, figuring out, streamlining processes, and at times like developing systems. And oftentimes, the agency owners didn't want it or wanted things done their way. So there's like a lot of dynamics. I mean, I've been in-house as well, so that has its own set of challenges, but I think it's like definitely a learning experience, and there's, I think severe burnout in the marketing agency. I know a lot of people talk about kind of like mental health in the tech space and tech founders and the higher rate of suicide. I don't think a lot of people consider talk about kind of like the mental drain of being any employee on any level at a digital marketing agency.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. And the agency I was at too, which like most agencies was bootstrapped. So when they had like we're working to get a new client, not only was there work on the proposal, but once the client was signed, there was a lot of excitement. But now the agency could start looking for one more person to hire, maybe. But until that person was hired up to speed, everybody else at the agency had to just do more work, pretty much. And then, as you probably know, these two agencies have smaller margins. So just the way you kind of the model works is they just can't pay you that much. So I think a lot of the advantages is that you get experience and it's a very rapid experience. And I think in a lot of ways that experience kind of set me up so I can get my next job.
No, I agree. And I think oftentimes also like throughout your career you have like good good periods, and then like you plateau, and sometimes everything that goes up must go down kind of. So a lot of the time when you have everything aligned, your personal, your professional life, everything else is going well, it's kind of you have to prepare your mindset and yourself to potentially have something implode. I've had stuff in my career and during that time also in my personal life. Have you had anything like a, defining moment where like it felt like everything around you collapsed that you had to pivot? Maybe it was, your personal life affecting, your professional or vice versa.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those, and in some ways, I've almost had a moment like that at even like every job I've been at. So at the agency, and this is one of the reasons like I ended up leaving at one point. And I've wrote about this on my LinkedIn, so I don't mind at this point discussing it openly. The agency owner, who I think one of the smartest people I've worked with, was like standing in front of my desk and just banging her fist on my desk, asking about something that like didn't really matter. It was just a client thing. I could just tell she was having a really bad day. I think we lost a big client around that time, and she was just being super emotional and stuff. So I didn't react. Like, again, at that time I was already like 31, 32 years old. So so I just knew, hey, like this is just gonna be a bad day. I just let her say her piece. But I realized right then and there that, hey, like I just need to like this is a toxic environment. I've already been there for several months. I learned all I need. I should just start, like looking for other options. And that was basically the time that I decided, hey, like I'm going to put in my notice and I'll just find another job. And at that time, when I talked to other marketers, they recommended like an in-house job. They said, it's kind of more relaxed compared to agencies, and you get to just focus on one industry, one company, one set of campaigns.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I guess I've experienced certain situations where like, I guess at times you also kind of question your integrity in certain places. Like you start a role, it could be a big agency, a small agency, but things are kind of like nickel and dimed, or like corners are cut, like in terms of clients, or clients are expecting work and think, there's 100 hours done for certain clients, and there's only maybe, a handful, five or six. I mean, I've been in situations where a client was spending, let's say, like $40,000 a month. I was the only one responsible for it, and maybe I did a total of 8 hours for those $40,000. So, like, I also saw the disparity. Like, I'm getting a salary, and you're literally getting like, exponentially higher value add, and I'm adding my expertise that I've brought along the way. So there's like situations like that, and like you mentioned, how you handle, I guess, that situation also in your early 30s would have probably been different in your early 20s. So I think like developing and handling kind of and experiencing, really experiencing those kind of situations prepare you how to handle it in the future, because if you're not accustomed to it, you may blow up, you may get into like a shouting match. And I think that's all like, emotional empathy and emotional IQ, and building that up, how to like interpersonal skills, because even people within like their 40s, 50s, even 60s in the workplace, some, C-suite executives don't necessarily know how to speak to their people, or don't really know how to connect in that level, or potentially like, all right, they're acting a certain way because they're dealing with something. So I think that's really important. And so I've been in situations like that, somebody coming into my office, but that actually led to a unfortunate termination, where it was that the boss was kind of like, taking advantage of one of the employees that was reporting to me, and I kind of stood up for that employee. And then I got an email over the weekend saying your role's been eliminated. So there were situations like that. What do you do? Do you do the right thing and like bite your tongue, or do you, stand up for employees? I think there's a lot of that around in the marketing industry as well.
Yeah, and I always try to think long term when I can. Obviously, sometimes I get emotional too and react. But in that situation too, I knew I wanted to still leave on good terms because I knew it would be nice to have that manager provide a positive reference for me. And we've never had a problem as far as my work quality. So that's kind of why too. Like I left on good terms. I believe like there were too like a lot of stories that were told about me after I left about how like it was like me being fired versus me leaving on my own, and kind of, I mean, now I laugh about this stuff because kind of pity and I don't care. But back then, again, I always kind of try to think long term and think of it as like a sequence of steps in my career, and I'm trying to kind of build upon each step.
Yeah, I think it's important, regardless of kind of what industry you're in, like you just mentioned, kind of leaving on good terms, regardless of kind of the situation. Because I've been in situations where it's like, I left a role, or had a client or consulted for someone, and, potentially in house or on the agency side, and the team was toxic, the dynamic was kind of weird, but I mean, I still delivered. Like like my results spoke for themselves. So even though you may have not liked me for some trivial reason, may be something that's legitimate or not, like you can't deny the results. So I've had people, because I left on good terms, reach out to me after the fact, like, hey, I'm working on this client on the side, can you like, do a proposal, can you like, help with the account, or like, I just started this agency or consulting group, and basically, can you, do a proposal, and they would be paying me and I would be paying you, situations like that. And that was just kind of like not burning those bridges. So like you said, leaving on good terms goes a long way, and I think it shows like your maturity, or the person's leaving maturity also. Like you could be petty, but you took kind of the higher road as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like what people remember the most about you is your work ethic and how much value and effort you contributed. So even if you don't get along, like I've had that happen too at jobs where I didn't really get along that well with the person, there was always tension there. But after like I left or they left the company, we still maintained a very positive relationship because they respected my work and I respected their work. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I agree. So what are you kind of currently working on? So we talked about kind of your journey, You going to a B2B SaaS company. What are you currently doing in terms of kind of the marketing space and consulting?
Sure. So, just to quickly wrap up the story, so I ended up, working at a few different companies similar to you. Eventually, I worked at this company for about 3.5 years, worked with this guy who was like a four-time CMO, probably to this day, one of the smartest marketers I've actually worked with because he's just been doing it for decades. Learned a ton from him that allowed me to then get a CMO job at a Series B tech company. And that was going great until the company didn't raise funding they were expecting. They ended up, laying off 15% of the employees. I got laid off. After I left, I heard that some other people were also laid off and stuff. And that was December, and that's when I decided, hey, like, well, this is a great time for me to do my own thing, um, because the job market is very tough, and a lot of the jobs I was seeing were just not even the right type. So that's when I decided to do like what I call, fractional CMO or business growth consulting, where, I work with these companies. They typically have a small marketing team or at least like one marketing hire, and I'm just helping, sort of optimize everything they're doing to, generate pipeline sales and help them grow.
So a lot of people, in the B2B space on platforms like LinkedIn, mention fractional CMO, but most people don't necessarily know the definition or the ins and outs. So can you explain what a fractional kind of CMO is? I mean, obviously I know what it is, but kind of for the audience and how you actually help clients and what that role kind of entails.
Yeah, no, and I love that you asked that question because you're right. A lot of people too are just calling themselves a fractional CMO, and you look at like their job history, and they were like a specialist or like maybe a director, which even those people I have more respect for. So it's a part-time marketing leader, and it's someone that generally works 1 day, 2 days per week with your company as part of your team, and they have very specific goals. So, generally the companies I work with, they're maybe, 5, 10, 20 million in revenue, and they're just trying to get to that next stage in revenue. They have aggressive goals, and they have a lot of the pieces in place. They just need sort of more kind of holistic help, either from a go-to-market strategy, either like how to better spend their budget or just how to make their marketing more effective. And a lot of my work too ends up being both on the marketing side and coordinating very closely with sales. So while working full time too, I've managed BDRs and SDRs. So I'm pretty good at not just the marketing piece, but even getting them like quality sales opportunities that at least, end up um, being more likely to turn into deals and things like that. So that's a lot of my work. Obviously, every company is different, and it really depends on the company and what they need.
Yeah, now kind of like, you working for yourself, and you mentioned kind of building relationships along the way in your career. Obviously, we know the hardest thing is to get a client first. Get a business partner, a client, whatever you're doing. How are you currently kind of, getting clients or business opportunities for yourself? Is it, relationships you've built in the past? Is it another way? Are you generating kind of leads? How are you kind of doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. I think getting your first client is the hardest. So after I got laid off in December and I realized, hey, this is what I want to do. I started reconnecting. Like I pulled up my LinkedIn, anybody who's like a VP, C level, or involved with like a VC firm or a private equity firm. I started just going through those people, sending them messages saying, hey, I'd love to reconnect. And on the call too, I wasn't necessarily asking for a referral. It's more, hey, finding out where they're at, what they're doing, and just saying, hey, so I lost my job. This is what I'm doing now. If you know of anybody who I could help, just let me know. And I kind of kept it very casual. And from doing that, I ended up connecting with someone who he's a CEO now, and he sits on the board of a few companies here in Chicago. He connected me with the co-founder and chief product officer at another company, and he's like, they need a lot of marketing help. Even from the board, we've been advising them to get someone who's experienced in marketing. So he just did that introduction, and I took it from there and ended up getting kind of a 3-month gig. from doing that. So that was, I think that's like the fastest way, at least, to get like your first clients.
Now, you said you were in Chicago. Have you always worked out of Chicago, or were you other areas around kind of the U.S. or anywhere else?
Most of my career has been in Chicago, either in the city or in the suburbs. That's just because it's where my like my parents and immediate family is based. So I think that's also an advantage because like I have a lot of connections here, and Chicago is a big enough city where there's a lot of opportunities. So I think that helped too when I was reconnecting with people.
Yeah, because I just asked kind of like what the I don't know I've actually been flown out to Chicago. I think it was like 10 years ago for an opportunity at a startup. So like they paid for everything, so I'm like, why not? It's a free trip. So I had an interview there, but just kind of thinking about like business climates, and opportunities in different areas of the country. Obviously, there's kind of tech booms. Some places are kind of like, I would say, marketing centers or like agencies, global agencies want to put a flag in that city. So I was just wondering, kind of like the climate of Chicago currently within like the startup space and marketing space.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Like there was a like a tech boom. There's a lot of also fintech here, even though I haven't worked in fintech. Like fintech is a pretty popular thing because finance too like has a lot of roots in Chicago. And then there are startups, and so I know there's a lot of like ad tech startups. The company I worked at for a long time was supply chain tech, which there's a lot of supply chain companies too that are based in Chicago because it's in the center of the U.S. So supply chain, logistics, ad tech. There is a lot of sort of those companies around and opportunities around.
That makes sense. So, what's one piece of advice you could leave with the audience, personal or professional?
Sure. So, and this is kind of crossing to both, but like kind of the lesson I learned after getting laid off was, if you're not building some kind of an online presence, some people call it a personal brand, although that word starts to, sound loaded. You're really missing out because you're commoditizing yourself. Like like even if you get a job or you get clients later on, the best you're going to do is get like the market rate for your services. Whereas if you're building an online presence, creating relationships, just trying to get your voice out there and personality out there, you start building somewhat of a personal brand. And that's the key to being able to get higher quality clients, sort of charge more for your services. It's not different than, like a brand versus a commodity, even in business. So, that's what I'd encourage people to do. Like for me, I think LinkedIn makes that very easy, where you start posting on there, connecting with people and engaging. But there's obviously a lot of other ways to build an online presence.
Yeah, I agree. I think like your brand transcends where you're at. Like that's what's going to give you your value. And oftentimes you may be the best expert in whatever field. Maybe you're the best developer, but if nobody knows that, somebody that is maybe, 10 years less experienced, but has a solid personal brand online and is demonstrating, putting out materials like, how they achieved success, networking things, people within kind of who they're connected, things that they do in terms of conferences, maybe speaking engagements. Obviously, I'm a proponent for audio content since we're on a podcast. That's one reason I started a podcast, having conversations with people and connecting with people. If I can help them in any way, if obviously if they can help me in some way or another along the way. So I think that's important, and even kind of doubling down on really like putting myself out there, even though nobody likes to like be in front of the camera. One, two, like if you go a step further in a studio, because I've done studio interviews on other podcasts and like media publications, and three, I've spoken at like different conferences about podcasting and stuff like that. So being on stage, but getting yourself out of your comfort zone. Not everybody is wants to share their business online, which is fine because you can theoretically disconnect your personal and professional brand if you want to do that. But really kind of like putting yourself out there and being seen, because the internet and technology is moving so rapidly that you're going to be left behind. And if you don't kind of like upskill yourself and show that like you're doing all these things, you're working with all these people, nobody are ever going to know that, you know, you are achieving these great things that they can possibly, that you can possibly help their company or brand with.
Yeah, I think it's really like the ultimate way to future proof your career, regardless of what you end up doing, whether you end up doing your own thing, getting jobs. It just gives you a lot more exposure and more opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. So I really appreciate you stopping by today. Can you let the audience know how they could find you or anything else you have going on?
Sure. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you just look up my name on LinkedIn, that's the best way to connect with me. I share a lot of advice on there on, driving growth at different businesses and some of the marketing strategies I use. So I sort of do a lot on there, and that's the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. Thanks again for stopping by.
Thank you for having me on, Roman.